Welcome to our channel. Before we get started, please consider liking and subscribing so we can bring more stories like this to you.
First night frights. The buzzing fluorescents of St. Jude's were a jarring counterpoint to Alara's hopeful expectations. She'd envisioned her first night illuminated by the soft glow of kindness, not this harsh, flickering reality. Paint peeled from the walls in mournful curls, while the linoleum bore witness to countless frantic steps. I felt less like a haven of healing and more like a forgotten corner, suffocating under layers of decay. Alara smoothed the crisp fabric of her new navy scrubs, a stark contrast to the clinging humidity. This wasn't the pristine, cutting-edge hospital she'd pictured throughout her arduous nursing program. This was different. At the nurse's station, a weary woman named Brenda barely looked up from her crossword. "Newbie?" she muttered, circling a word. "Alara, right? Reports digital. And don't expect any gratitude. Ever." Alara offered a smile. "Just glad to be here, helping out." Brenda scoffed, a mirthless sound. "That'll evaporate before dawn. Trust me." She tapped the screen. "Room 307, Mr. Henderson. Pain meds. Rings every quarter hour. Enjoy." Mr. Henderson was a mere prelude. The night surged forward, a relentless current of bedpan calls, blood pressure checks, and the subdued thrum of suffering. Each patient contained their own universe of pain and anxiety, and Alara dedicated herself to each encounter, attempting to ignite a tiny spark of solace amidst the sterile atmosphere. Yet, with each caring act, the building seemed to resist, shadows deepening, silence amplifying its oppressive weight. Around 2 a.m., the hospital settled into an uneasy quiet. Most patients slumbered, their breathing shallow and labored. Alara was updating charts when a sharp, insistent voice sliced through the intercom. "Nurse Reyes, report to operating theater B immediately." Code 9. Repeat. "Nurse Reyes, operating theater B, code 9. Code 9 was absent from any of the hospital's documented procedures. Alara furrowed her brow, glancing at Brenda. Now slumped and seemingly unconscious, she prodded her shoulder. "Brenda, code 9. What is that?" Brenda jolted awake, her eyes wide, displaying a terror that seemed excessive. "Operating theater B. You shouldn't go there." "But the intercom." "Ignore it," Brenda begged, her voice a bare thread. "Just ignore it. Say you're swamped." "I can't. Someone needs assistance." Alara's sense of duty was too intrinsic, her compassion too profound. "What's wrong with operating theater B?" Brenda shook her head, refusing eye contact. "Nothing. Just outdated equipment. Always failing. Don't say I didn't warn you." Alara paused, the prickle of unease at her nape battling her professional oath. She chose to trust her intuition, the instinct that told her someone required genuine medical attention. Operating theater B resided at the end of a long, poorly lit corridor, a section of the hospital perpetually veiled in gloom. The air cooled noticeably as she advanced, the hush broken only by the steady plink, plink, plink of a leaking faucet nearby. A solid steel door, typically ajar, stood closed and ominous. A small, hand-painted sign above declared, "Restricted access." Alara inhaled deeply, then pushed the door inward. The room contrasted sharply with the rest of the decaying hospital. Polished stainless steel surfaces mirrored the intense brilliance of modern surgical lamps. The air reeked of sterility, almost astringent. Two men in somber suits stood near the operating table, their expressions severe and inscrutable. One, a stocky man with a shaved head and a scar bisecting his jawline, turned toward Alara. "You the nurse?" he rasped. "Yes. I'm Alara Reyes." I answered the code 9. The man gave a curt nod. "He's losing blood. Fast. Get to it." A man lay on the operating table, his face ashen and slick with sweat. His expensive suit soaked in crimson. A gaping, jagged wound marred his abdomen, held partially closed by makeshift bandages. Alara immediately recognized the trauma. A gunshot. This wasn't faulty machinery. This was something else entirely, something perilous. As Alara moved to examine the patient, the second man, leaner and more wiry than the first, closed the distance. his hand resting nonchalantly inside his jacket. "Just so you know, nurse," he murmured, his voice a low, chilling vibration. "What happens in this room stays in this room. Got it?" Alara met his eyes, her fear momentarily eclipsed by a jolt of adrenaline. "I understand that someone needs my help," she replied, her voice surprisingly resolute. "And that's all that matters at this moment." She ripped open a sterile package, her hands moving with well-honed precision as she began taking the patient's vitals. She knew, with a bone-deep certainty, that her first shift at St. Jude's had spiraled into something far more tangled. The young nurse had stumbled into a situation far grander and far more treacherous than she could have fathomed. The secret of operating theater B was poised to test her principles and meddle in ways she never anticipated under the knife under fire. The chart identified him as Mr. Vincenzo Rossi. Alara paid it scant attention, lost in the preoperative whirlwind. Then she registered the man on the table, even in slumber. A palpable force emanated from him, muscled shoulders stretched the fabric of his gown, and faded scars mapped his forearms like ancient rivers. But it was the face. Vic Cavallo. The name detonated in her mind headlines, hushed rumors. The chilling dread associated with it all crashed down. "Reyes, enough daydreaming, prep the patient." Dr. Markov snapped, his features a permanent landscape of displeasure. A brittle calm coated his words, belied by the frantic flicker in his gaze. Alara's throat constricted. She plastered on her professional demeanor. "Of course, doctor." She plunged into the task of swabbing the skin with antiseptic, the medicinal odor doing little to quell the turmoil in her gut. Her fingers trembled as she attached the EKG leads. Cavallo's heart hammered with unusual force, almost violent. Markov, now scrubbing, muttered about administrative incompetence and the unreasonable expectations levied upon him, tuning him out. Alara concentrated on her duties. She was a nurse, an exceptionally capable one, and at that moment, this man, regardless of his identity, depended on her. Barely had the scalpel broken skin when pandemonium erupted. A thunderous blast shook the operating theater, followed by a sickening thud as something substantial slammed against the outer wall. The overhead lights convulsed, painting the room in a disorienting strobe effect. Markov's curse was a torrent of panicked Russian. "What in God's name was that?" Alara yelled, her voice strained to cut through the cacophony. Before Markov could respond, the double doors splintered inward, revealing two masked figures brandishing weapons. Gunfire spat from the muzzles, gouging holes in the pristine walls. Markov shrieked, scrambling for safety behind a metal tray stacked with instruments. Alara froze for a heartbeat, her brain struggling to reconcile the surreal horror unfolding before her. This couldn't be real. Not here. Not now. Then she spotted it. A crimson blossom staining Cavallo's chest, perilously close to the incision. Still unconscious, he was unaware of the raging chaos, but another bullet, a shard of flying debris, and instinct took over. Forget the fear. Ignore the assailants. Focus solely on the man beneath the lights. Alara ripped the heavy surgical drape from its stand, deploying it as a makeshift shield to protect Cavallo's exposed torso. "Markov, suction," she commanded, her tone surprisingly unwavering. The doctor, paralyzed by terror, remained unresponsive, cursing silently. She seized the suction tube herself, desperately clearing the pooling blood. The air reeked of burnt powder and the coppery tang of blood. Another fusillade of shots tore through the room. A bullet whispered past Alara's ear, lodging itself in the wall with a dull thud. She didn't even twitch. Her focus narrowed, her movements economical and precise. Clamps, gauze, sutures. She issued silent commands to herself, anticipating the next critical need. She located the source of the hemorrhage, a lacerated artery, and clamped it shut, the crimson tide reduced to a manageable trickle. The heart monitor beeped a frantic, erratic rhythm, mirroring the savage assault on Cavallo's system. "Damn it!" she hissed. His blood pressure was tanking, stabilization was paramount, and immediate. She tore open a saline bag and forced the 4-line into his arm, fighting to maintain control of her trembling hands. The gunfire intensified, edging closer. She could decipher shouts from the corridor outside, raw and enraged. This wasn't a mere drive-by. This was a coordinated attack. She glanced up to see Markov, still cowering, his face ashen and glistening with perspiration. "We're all going to die," he bleated. Elara ignored him. Cavallo clung to life, however tenuously, and for as long as breath filled her lungs, she wouldn't let him expire on her operating table. She was under the knife, under fire, yet somehow, in control. She was a nurse, and she refused to yield. Whispers in the dark. The cloying sweetness of disinfectant fought a losing battle against the sharp, iron scent of blood at St. Jude's, under lockdown, resembled a prison. Each entrance was sealed off, every hallway patrolled by guards whose expressions mirrored the tightness of their grip on their batons. The declaration had come swiftly after the shooting, ensnaring everyone within its walls. A throbbing pressure pulsed behind Elara's temples, a nasty brew of fatigue and dread. Hours she'd spent stemming the flow of blood, soothing terrified patients, and desperately trying to silence the insidious whisper that something was profoundly wrong. Granted a mandatory respite, sleep felt like an unattainable dream. Instead, she drifted through the desolate service corridors, spaces normally alive with the clamor of orderlies and the rattle of supply carts. The oppressive quiet was punctuated only by the drone of the emergency generators. It was near the grimy service elevator, obscured by a jumble of discarded gurneys, that she overheard them. Markov's voice, trembling with a stark desperation, was unmistakable. "I told you, the risk is astronomical. The hospital is swarming with security." The reply, a gravelly rumble, dripped menace. "Cavallo ain't gonna be pleased to hear that. Document he's got expectations. You struck a bargain." Elara recognized the accent. Hard-edged Brooklyn. A cog in Cavallo's machine. Undoubtedly, Elara flattened herself against the elevator's cold skin, her pulse a frantic drum against her ribs. What bargain? But the lockdown, the scrutiny. Markov floundered. "It's not just about getting him in and out. It's about the collateral patients." The gruff voice emitted a low chuckle that slithered down Elara's spine. "Cavallo looks after his own. And you deal with the loose ends. That's the arrangement." A pause, the rasp of a lighter igniting, a sharp inhale. "You wouldn't want to disappoint Mr. Cavallo, would you, Doctor? Mishaps happen within these walls all the time." Markov's response was barely audible. "No, of course not." "Then you'll remedy the situation. We'll be in touch." Footsteps, heavy and deliberate, receded, leaving Markov shrouded in the suffocating silence. Elara remained concealed, her thoughts spiraling. Collateral patients. Loose ends. The implications hung heavy in the air, thick with menace. It reeked of clandestine surgeries. But who were these patients, and what kind of loose ends demanded Cavallo's attention? The scattered pieces began to coalesce, forming a sickening picture. The clandestine operating room, the unusual security protocols, the furtive whispers she'd dismissed. It wasn't merely about patching up Cavallo. It was something far more insidious, a festering wound beneath the hospital's starched facade. After an agonizing interlude, Markov emerged from behind the gurneys, his complexion ashen and gaunt. He dragged a shaky hand through his thinning hair, his eyes darting wildly. He resembled prey caught in a trap, oblivious to Elara. He hastened down the corridor, vanishing toward the surgical wing. Elara waited until she was certain he was gone before venturing from her sanctuary. The hospital now felt tainted, corrupted. The sterile scent seemed to mask a deeper decay. Her initial innocence felt like a profound betrayal. She had placed her trust in these individuals, clinging to the sanctity of the Hippocratic oath. Now, doubts gnawed at her. The lockdown, she now understood, was not solely for the protection of the hospital. It was a means of entombing its darkest secrets. She couldn't dismiss what she'd unearthed. She couldn't feign ignorance. The ethical ramifications were staggering. People were being victimized, potentially eliminated. And she, a nurse, was rendered complicit by her reticence. A chilling wave of apprehension threatened to paralyze her, followed swiftly by a surge of steel resolve. She was but one person, a relatively inexperienced nurse, yet she carried a sacred duty. A duty owed to her patients, to the very integrity of the institution, and to the unwavering compass of her conscience. She needed to unveil the truth. She had to amass evidence, meticulously and cautiously, before she herself became one of those loose ends. The clandestine whispers had ignited a spark within Alara, a fierce determination she never knew she possessed. The perilous pursuit of truth had commenced. The janitor's secret. The smell of dust and decay hung heavy in the hospital archives. A mausoleum of forgotten paperwork. Alara coughed, pulling her scarf higher over her nose. Sunlight filtered weakly through the grimy windows, illuminating motes dancing in the stagnant air. Row upon row of metal shelves stretched before her, crammed with manila folders tied with faded twine. It was a daunting task, but she had to find something, anything, to confirm her suspicions. She started with patient records from the past year, those with unusual or missing paperwork. Each folder felt heavy with secrets, the crisp rustle of paper amplified in the silence. Hours blurred, her back ached, her eyes burned, but she pressed on, fueled by a growing unease and the memory of the man in the surgery room. Finally, tucked behind a stack of outdated insurance forms, she found it. A thin, unmarked ledger. Its pages were yellowed and brittle, the ink faded. Inside, names were listed, not under patient identification numbers, but crude aliases. The butcher, Silas, Mama Rosa. Next to each name was a series of coded medical procedures and dates. It was a black market patient list, and the procedures. They were experimental, often brutal, and definitely illegal. That a cold wave washed over Alara. This was bigger than she imagined. She carefully photographed each page, her hands trembling slightly. She then returned the ledger to its hiding place, taking a mental note of exactly where it was. As she was about to leave, she saw a second notebook, also unlabeled. This one contained medical records. The records were horrifying. Organ transplants, surgeries using outdated equipment, experimental drug tests, and the dates corresponded with the patient list. Alara couldn't carry this burden alone. She needed someone she could trust, someone who knew the hospital inside and out. Only one person came to mind. Frank, the night janitor. He had a quiet wisdom about him, an understanding that went beyond his simple job. She found him in the darkened cafeteria, mopping the floor. The fluorescent lights hummed, casting long shadows across the room. He looked up, his face etched with weariness, but his eyes held a spark of kindness. "Frank," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Can I talk to you?" He straightened up, leaning on his mop. "Something troubling you, Alara? You look like you've seen a ghost." She gestured to a nearby table, and they sat down. She told him everything, about the surgery room, the patient, the ledger, the medical records. As she spoke, she watched his face. The lines around his eyes deepened, and his usual good humor vanished, replaced by a grim resignation. When she finished, he remained silent for a long moment, staring at the floor. Finally, he sighed, a sound that seemed to carry the weight of years. "I've known for a while, Alara," he said, his voice low and raspy. "Heard things, seen things. This hospital, it has a dark side. A side that runs deep." "Why didn't you say anything?" she asked, her voice laced with disappointment. He looked up at her, his eyes filled with a deep sadness. "Because some things are better left buried, Alara. Digging them up only brings trouble, dangerous trouble. But people are being hurt. Frank. They're being exploited." He nodded slowly. "I know. And I wish I could help. I really do. But these people, they're powerful. They have eyes and ears everywhere. Then help me be careful. Help me navigate this. I can't do this alone." Frank hesitated. He looked at her, his gaze unwavering. He saw the fire in her eyes, the unwavering determination. He knew he couldn't turn her away. "All right, Alara," he said, finally. "I'll help you. But you have to promise me you'll be careful. This is a dangerous game you're playing." He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "They're watching. Always watching. Trust no one, Alara. No one. And if you feel like you're getting too close, you run. You run far, and you don't look back." His expression was bleak. "Because if they catch you, they won't hesitate." Experiments and ethics. The fluorescent lights of the records room hummed, casting a sterile glow on the dusty shelves. Alara coughed, waving away a cloud of disturbed particles. "Anything?" she asked, her voice barely audible above the rhythmic click of Frank's camera. Frank lowered the camera, his face grim. Patient logs, dates, diagnoses. Nothing overtly suspicious. Just a lot of complicated procedures for a community clinic. He gestured to a stack of manila folders. But look at these consent forms. Or rather, the lack thereof. Alara picked up a file. The name Silas Bellwether was typed on the tab. Inside, the patient's medical history was meticulously documented, detailing a rare and aggressive form of sarcoma. The treatment plan, however, was vague, referencing novel therapies and experimental protocols. The signature line for consent was blank. Markov's cutting corners? Alara muttered, flipping through more files. The pattern repeated. Complex cases, experimental treatments, missing consent forms. Point 1 caught her eye. Jane Doe number 7. No name, no history beyond the symptoms. Just a series of increasingly invasive surgeries documented in clinical, detached prose. A cold dread seeped into Alara's bones. These aren't just corners, Frank. These are blatant violations that he's experimenting on them. Frank ran a hand through his thinning hair. Could be legitimate research, Alara. Maybe he's got some kind of grant. Without consent? On vulnerable patients? Look at this Jane Doe file, she's just a number. A test subject. Alara's voice rose, the clinical detachment of the file making her blood boil. The air in the room felt thick, charged with the weight of Markov's actions. Okay. Calm down, Frank said, holding up a hand. I see what you're saying, that it's deeply troubling. He shuffled through the files again, his brow furrowed. But we need proof. Something concrete to take to the authorities. Suddenly, a low thud echoed from the hallway. Alara froze, her heart hammering against her ribs. Did you hear that? Frank nodded, his eyes wide. Yeah. Someone's here. He quickly switched off the camera and stuffed it into his bag. Let's get out of here. They moved silently to the door, Alara peering through the crack. A hulking figure in a dark suit was patrolling the hallway, a glint of metal visible at his waist. Point one of Sal DeMarco's men. Back in? Alara whispered, pulling Frank back into the room. We're trapped. Panic flickered in Frank's eyes. What do we do? Alara scanned the room, her mind racing. A small window, high up on the wall, offered the only escape. Give me a boost, she said, grabbing a nearby metal stool. Frank hesitated. Are you crazy? You can't climb out of there. We don't have a choice. Alara placed the stool beneath the window and clambered onto it. Come on, Frank. Now. With a grunt, Frank steadied the stool as Alara reached for the window latch. It was stiff. Rusted with age, she strained, her fingers slipping on the cold metal. The footsteps in the hallway were getting closer. Finally, the latch gave way with a loud click. Alara pushed the window open. Cold night air rushing in, the drop to the ground was significant, at least 10 feet. Help me down, she said, adrenaline coursing through her veins. Frank boosted her up further, and she managed to swing one leg over the windowsill. I'm going to drop, she warned. Brace yourself. She took a deep breath and jumped, landing heavily on the soft earth below. Pain shot up her ankle, but she ignored it. Frank! Hurry! Frank, his face pale, hesitated at the window. He was older, less agile. I can't, he said, his voice trembling. I'm too old for this. Yes, you can, Alara said, her voice firm. I'll catch you. Trust me. The footsteps were right outside the door now. Frank took a deep breath and launched himself out of the window, landing awkwardly in Alara's arms. They both tumbled to the ground, a tangle of limbs and whispered curses. Get up, Alara hissed, pulling him to his feet. He's coming. They stumbled into the darkness, the weight of what they had discovered pressing down on them. Markov wasn't just a surgeon on the take, he was a monster, and they were the only ones who knew. The ethical lines Alara had been struggling with had vanished completely. The truth had to be revealed, whatever the cost, the boss's warning. Alara's eyes fluttered open, the sterile scent of antiseptic stinging her nostrils. Dawn painted the edges of the drawn blinds a bruised purple. Cavallo was awake. He sat propped against the pillows, his face a mask of weary alertness. The 4 drips snaked into his arm, a lifeline in the quiet room. He watched her, his dark eyes unreadable. "You stayed?" he said, his voice a gravelly rasp. Alara pushed herself up, the stiff hospital gown scratching against her skin. "Someone had to. Besides," she added, attempting a lightness she didn't feel, "you owe me a new pair of shoes." A flicker of something, perhaps amusement, crossed his face. "Debt is a language I understand. You have my gratitude, Nurse Reyes." "Alara," she corrected, then immediately regretted the familiarity. He ignored it. Bravery is a valuable, but often misplaced, virtue. He paused, studying her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. "This world, it's not for someone like you. Alara it eats kindness for breakfast and spits out the bones." His words felt like a warning, a veiled threat. "What do you mean?" Cavallo sighed, a sound like air leaking from a punctured tire. "You saw things last night. Things? Best left unseen. My world isn't a playground. Alara it's a cage. And once you're inside, it's hard to get out." Alara stood her ground, her hands clenching into fists at her sides. "I'm not afraid. Everyone's afraid of something," he countered, his gaze unwavering. "The smart ones just know what to fear." He took a shallow breath, wincing. "Consider this a professional courtesy. Stay out of it, Alara. For your own good." Before she could respond, a deafening crash echoed from the hallway. The lights flickered, plunging the room into momentary darkness. Then, the backup generator kicked in, bathing the room in an unsettling yellow glow. Gunfire erupted, a staccato symphony of destruction tearing through the thin walls. "They found us," Cavallo hissed, his eyes hardening. He ripped the 4 from his arm, ignoring Alara's gasp of protest as blood welled from the puncture wound. Panic clawed at Alara's throat, but the ingrained instinct of a nurse took over. She grabbed a handful of gauze and pressed it against Cavallo's arm, applying firm pressure. "Stay still," she ordered, her voice surprisingly steady. Bullets thudded into the walls, plaster dust raining down on them. The metallic tang of blood filled the air, mingling with the acrid smell of gunpowder. She yanked the bed away from the wall, creating a makeshift shield between them and the door. "Get down!" she yelled, pushing Cavallo behind the bed. He moved with surprising agility for a man who'd been bleeding out hours before. More shots rang out, closer now. The door splintered, wood fragments flying across the room. Alara grabbed the nearest thing she could find, a heavy metal bedpan, and braced herself. 2 figures burst through the door, their faces masked, guns blazing. Alara didn't hesitate. She hurled the bedpan with all her might, hitting one of the attackers square in the chest. He staggered back, momentarily stunned. Cavallo used the distraction to his advantage. He lunged forward, grabbing the other attacker's wrist and twisting it with brutal efficiency. The sickening crack echoed in the confined space as the gun clattered to the floor. The attacker Alara had hit recovered, his face contorted with rage. He raised his weapon again, aiming directly at Cavallo. Alara dove forward, shoving Cavallo out of the way just as the gun fired. The bullet whizzed past her ear, leaving a ringing silence in its wake. Behind the cabinet, the report of a gunshot ripped through the fragile quiet of St. Jude's, a jolt that vibrated through Alara as she huddled behind an overturned gurney. The sharp bite of burnt powder filled the air, mingling with the sharp scent of spilled blood. She risked a glance. 2 shadows, illuminated by the erratic buzz of overhead fluorescence, engaged in a deadly dance of gunfire and desperate attacks. This wasn't some simple gang squabble. The air crackled with personal animosity. Something far more. Primal. Moretti's safety was paramount. Ignoring the din, Alara edged her way through the cramped space, past beds and machines, her pulse a frantic drum against her throat. He'd been stable on her last rounds, but in St. Jude's, stable meant a hair's breadth from disaster. His room offered a small mercy. Empty, save for Moretti himself, ashen and still against the stark white linens. Relief washed over her. Quickly turning to alarm, a stray bullet had grazed his temple, leaving a crimson streak. She snatched a sterile pad, gently cleaning the wound with practiced efficiency. Then she saw it, the antique cabinet across the room, usually perfectly aligned with the wall, stood slightly ajar and off angle she didn't remember at a dangerous curiosity. Ever her shadow beckoned, she eased the cabinet further open, revealing not the expected medical supplies, but a slender, dark opening with trepidation. She reached within, her fingers meeting the cool touch of metal. A latch. She released it. A soft snick, and the groan of ancient mechanisms followed, as the cabinet swung inward, exposing a passageway bathed in an eerie, almost antiseptic glow. A wave of frigid, purified air swept over her, a stark contrast to the heavy, stagnant atmosphere of the ward. Elara hesitated. This had to be it. The source of all the hushed rumors, the vanished inventory, the furtive nocturnal visits. She cast a worried glance at Moretti. His features relaxed and undefended. She couldn't abandon him for long, but neither could she ignore this revelation. Taking a resolute breath, she stepped across the threshold. The passage descended, the walls lined with polished, seamless steel. The air grew colder, purer. It wasn't long before the tunnel widened into a chamber that stole her voice. It was an operating theater, unlike anything she'd ever witnessed at St. Jude's, or indeed, anywhere. Cutting-edge equipment gleamed, reflecting the cool sheen of chrome and the subtle hum of advanced technology. Articulated robotic arms were suspended from the ceiling, consoles blinked with indecipherable data, and a colossal monitor displayed a detailed, three-dimensional rendering of what appeared to be a human heart. This wasn't merely a hospital. It was a clandestine clinic, catering to clientele with limitless resources and unspeakable secrets. The wave of sickness churned within her as the truth coalesced. The Mafia. This was where their illicit earnings flowed, where they mended their wounded, hidden from the scrutiny of the law. A pang of guilt constricted her chest. All this time, she had labored under the innocent delusion that St. Jude's was merely a struggling institution, chronically short-funded and overlooked. Now, the reality stood bare. A facade, a decaying mask concealing a secret empire of medical corruption. She noticed a door at the far end of the room, a small brass plaque shimmering in the soft light. Dr. Markov. The pieces fell into place with a sickening thud. The meticulous surgeon, his almost preternatural precision, the detached air of command that he wasn't just a healer. He was a linchpin in this elaborate deception. She had to confront him, turning back toward the hidden passage. Elara felt a surge of righteous anger, a fervent hunger for answers. She would return to Moretti, secure his well-being, and then she would find Dr. Markov. This deception had persisted for far too long. She would expose them all, regardless of the personal cost. The naive nurse was gone. Elara Reyes was ready for war, confessions, and betrayals. Elara discovered Markov in his cramped office, the overhead light glinting off his balding scalp. He jerked upright, surprise flashing in his bloodshot gaze. "Elara? What brings you here?" "The Santoro surgery, Dr. or 3. I know about it." Though her voice remained controlled, her pulse throbbed in her ears. Markov's face went ashen. He pivoted away, presenting his back to her. "You're mistaken. I haven't the faintest idea what you're implying." "Spare me the denials." Elara advanced. "I saw the aftermath. The discarded instruments, the blood, and him. He's connected. Isn't he? To the Mafia." He sighed, a sound like air escaping a punctured tire, and raked a hand through his thinning wisps of hair. "Fine. Yes. Santoro was a patient of sorts. A clandestine patient, treated outside protocol, under cover of night." "Why the secrecy, doctor?" He swung back, his eyes filled with desperate appeal. "I was cornered. They approached me. They needed discretion, someone who wouldn't pry. And that was enough for you? You simply caved?" Elara struggled to grasp his compliance. "It wasn't as simple as that," Markov retorted, the unexpected sharpness momentarily silencing her. He dropped his voice, leaning in with conspiratorial intimacy. "They brought up my obligations. Gambling debts, Elara. Crippling debts. Debts I could never manage alone. This was their solution. So, you mend injured criminals? I salvaged my skin." Markov's voice broke. "It began with Santoro. They required him alive. Then came another and yet another. The compensation is substantial, Alara, enough to keep the creditors at bay. Just how far does this web extend, Doctor? Are others involved? Markov hesitated, his eyes skittering around the small space. It's an intricate system. More than just me. There are understandings, with purchasing, security, even some within the administration. The hospital requires revenue, Alara. They choose not to scrutinize its origin. He appeared a broken man, drowning in his own moral compromises. A twinge of pity flickered within Alara, but she quickly extinguished it with the vivid memory of Santoro and the devastating magnitude of Markov's involvement. You're telling me the Mafia has established a covert medical facility within this hospital? Markov's silence served as tacit confirmation. Unseen, unheard, Vic Cavallo lingered in the darkened hallway outside Markov's office, eavesdropping. He'd been tracking Alara from Santoro's room. Intrigued by her reactions, he'd anticipated panic, tears, a quick retreat. Instead, he heard her dissecting Markov's deceptions, relentlessly pursuing the truth. He detected no fear, only an unyielding resolve that he'd gleaned enough. Later, as Alara left the hospital, drained and unnerved, a familiar figure materialized from the shadows. Cavallo. Miss Reyes, he murmured, his voice a low rumble. We need a conversation. He steered her toward his car. A black sedan parked some distance away, bathed in shadow. The interior possessed a cool atmosphere, tinged with the aroma of leather and expensive cigars. I overheard your chat with Dr. Markov. Cavallo began, his gaze focused intently on the road ahead. He conveyed part of the narrative, certainly, but not its entirety. Alara steeled herself. What did he omit? He omitted the depth of our reach. He paints himself as a pawn. He is, in a sense. But he knowingly entered the game. The hospital board, the police force, the city officials, they all partake of our generosity. They avert their gaze. It's a finely tuned mechanism. Why are you confiding in me? Suspicion colored Alara's tone. Cavallo shot her a glance, something inscrutable flickering in his eyes. Because I've been observing you, Miss Reyes. You are unfazed. You refuse to be intimidated. You are asking pointed questions, driven by a desire for genuine answers. This makes you dangerous. It also renders you useful. He guided the car to a halt in a deserted parking lot. I can supply you with irrefutable evidence, Reyes. Names, dates, financial records. Enough to dismantle the entire structure. But it comes at a cost. Alara's breath hitched. What's the price? Cavallo turned to face her squarely. You must pledge to expose everyone involved. No compromises. No backroom deals. Utter annihilation or no evidence at all. Once you embark on this path, there is no turning back. They will hunt you. Do you comprehend? Alara gazed into his eyes, the eyes of a man who had witnessed and perpetrated unimaginable atrocities. Yet, she also detected a spark, perhaps a glimmer of hope, or merely a longing for ultimate justice. I comprehend, she affirmed, her voice resolute. I pledge. Cavallo nodded, a stark satisfaction etched on his face. He reached inside his coat and retrieved a USB drive. Everything you require is contained within this. Exercise extreme caution, Miss Reyes. You are entering treacherous territory. The raid and its aftermath. A scream, sharp as shattered porcelain, ripped through the pre-dawn stillness. Then another, followed by the heavy cadence of boots hammering against St. Jude's institutional corridors from her window. Alara, already prepared for the inevitable, watched black SUVs infest the hospital grounds. Cerulean and crimson pulsed across the aged brickwork. The price of her whistleblowing had arrived. Bedlam erupted. Screams mingled with the clipped commands barked over police radios. A discordant symphony of panic. A wave of guilt washed over Alara, a frigid weight in her gut. This upheaval was her doing, a necessary tempest to cleanse the corruption festering within St. Jude's. Yet, the stark reality of the situation chilled her. She'd craved justice, but the collateral damage was palpable. Her phone vibrated. An anonymous missive. He's fleeing East Wing. Markov, predictable, he'd rather scurry into the shadows than confront his culpability. A conflict raged within Alara. Should she let him vanish? He deserved to answer for his crimes, his silent consent to the rot. But could she stomach becoming his executioner? She intercepted him near the service entrance. A pitiable figure in wrinkled scrubs, clutching a meager satchel. Fear had aged him a decade, etching lines of worry onto his ashen face. Markov, she stated. Her tone surprisingly firm. He flinched, his gaze skittering around like a trapped animal. Reyes? You? This is your fault, isn't it? I did what needed doing. Needed? You've destroyed me. Everything. He bolted for the exit, but the door flew inward before he could reach it. Two silhouettes stood framed against the nascent dawn. Not law enforcement, Cavallo's enforcers. Dr. Markov. The taller one rumbled, his voice a gravelly threat. Mr. Cavallo sends his regards. Markov whimpered, his fleeting courage dissolving like frost in sunlight. He scrambled backward, but their movements were disturbingly swift. They seized him, their grip like iron bands. Please, he choked out, his voice cracking with desperation. I can explain. I can fix this. Their response was silence. They hauled him away, his desperate cries fading into the gloom. Alara watched, her pulse a frantic drum against her ribs. This was not justice served. This was something far more sinister. The raid dragged on, an eternity etched in minutes. Law enforcement scoured the building, seizing records, hardware, and supplies. Interrogations were conducted with grim efficiency, patience, their sanctuary violated, huddled in fear. Families clamored for information. St. Jude's, a beacon of hope, had been transformed into a battleground as the sun ascended. The raid's initial fury subsided, replaced by a simmering unease. The air throbbed with unspoken anxieties. Then Cavallo materialized, gliding through the turmoil as if the chaos were a staged tableau for his amusement. His impeccably tailored suit was a jarring contrast to the surrounding disarray. People yielded before him, their eyes averted. He halted before Alara, his gaze intense and unwavering. Impressive, he observed, his voice devoid of warmth. You've certainly shaken things up. I revealed the truth, Alara countered, meeting his stare head-on. A fleeting, chilling smile touched his lips. Truth is a malleable thing, Nurse Reyes. Dependent on the teller. He surveyed the aftermath, his eyes like chips of obsidian. This was an aberration. An unauthorized undertaking. I am dismantling it. Effective immediately. Alara arched a skeptical brow. And you expect me to accept that? Believe what you will. But understand this. Order will be reimposed. St. Jude's will operate as intended. As a hospital. Under my aegis. He offered a slight inclination of his head. Consider this a clean slate. He turned and departed, leaving Alara isolated amidst the devastation. His words hung heavy, ambiguous and disquieting. Was this genuine atonement, or simply another calculated move in his power game? She scanned the faces of her colleagues, their expressions mirroring fear and uncertainty. Some were already preparing to flee, abandoning St. Jude's to its uncertain destiny. A surge of resolve coursed through Alara. She would not succumb. She would not allow Cavallo to triumph. The hospital, its vulnerable inhabitants, needed her. She strode towards the emergency room, its entrance bearing the scars of the morning's upheaval. The cloying scent of antiseptic and spilled blood lingered in the AI. So much remained to be done, so much healing to commence. Alara drew a deep breath and stepped inside. The battle for St. Jude's had just ignited.